Welcome to Philly Coco Presents Side Project Spotlight, episode 28. This is developers' journey into making cool stuff. We are your spotters in this developer version of a trust fall. I'm Kotaro.
I'm Steve.
And I'm Aaron.
And we are Philly Coco, a Philadelphia-based Cocoa Heads community focused on Apple development. That primarily, but not exclusively, means iOS, Mac, tvOS, and watchOS development. Philly Coco's true desire is to take you higher on your own developer journey. Whew. All right.
Nice.
How was that?
That was good.
I think
yeah.
getting the hang of this intro bit.
Hey,
Not there yet, but
you're going to become a professional podcaster.
I know, right? Now I'm going to be like and subscribe.
It's follow now, I think, right? That's what the new terminology is for some reason on Apple Podcasts. I saw it. I think Overcast changed it too, so you follow instead of subscribe, which I'm like, okay.
Follow us on Apple Podcasts.
I don't know if I'm on board.
I don't know what you're going to do on Overcast or any of those other third parties, but.
Still subscribe on YouTube if I ever put this on YouTube. So
yeah, if that ever happens.
So this week,
cool.
So this week we are. I don't know what are we talking about this week.
We are talking. Well, we're trying to get back to talking a bit about our project, which is our to-do list app, our task habit forming app called codename PickleJar.
Yeah, I don't know what we're actually going to call it. Probably not that when it comes to well,
probably not that.
I mean, we had this amazing logo, so.
I mean, done in Sketch, done in like a day, less than a day, more like in like 5 minutes or yeah. So
yeah, every time I launched it on the simulator though, I chuckle.
Yes, it is like the usually, so for people who don't know, every time I start a project, if I'm relatively serious about it, usually the default is like a wireframe looking for the app icon. Apple usually defaults to like a very wireframe, app icon, like a placeholder, basically. What I like to do is just make a very simple icon to differentiate it, for one thing, against all my other like test apps or whatever, but also to give me sort of this like initial like motivation to get me like in the mode of like, okay, I'm building an app. This app is real. Like
it's totally been working.
Yeah, it's totally a thing, right? Like, and it's kind of funny because like
so motivated.
Like when I do these for clients, like the mental shift immediately changes in a very nuanced way. From them thinking like, oh, this is just a prototype or whatever, to like, oh, this is an app now. It's hilarious, like the psychological power of an app icon.
Yeah, I joke, but it actually it did help even from the beginning to see it as a real project and not just a demo app you're just playing with to throw away or something.
Yeah, that doesn't mean like you're going to finish the app. It just means that it's just one of those.
Well, at this rate, that's definitely seems true. Yeah. No, but it does help. I think that's a really good technique to start out with, make an icon.
Yeah. So, so I can tell on my level of progress. I don't remember what the prior podcast we talked about where I was, but basically I had finished more or less all the basic UI, like the core components, which I like about SwiftUI. Is like SwiftUI is very good about like allowing you to isolate these small components, these UI components, a button, a checkbox that are customized, and just keep them in their own isolated view, since everything is a view in this world. And then you can kind of like refine it there. And then when you're ready to like combine it into like a bigger view, you have them in place to just, plug and play, and they should, theoretically they should work well together. That was my goal, to at least get the card view, which is kind of like the initial like mechanic to swipe left or swipe right what tasks you have finished. But I never got to that. So.
Well, I mean, the cards at least render okay, and you can you can gesture them around and stuff.
Right. And, you can see them, but they just don't. They don't do anything significant.
SwiftUI's component nature is actually very useful, because I was doing updates, and I updated some of your components in the process slightly, and it was very easy to do because they're all nice and isolated, and they tend to declare up at the top like what their input needs to be, like what properties they need that are required, and then they're just kind of self-contained. You can check them out in the preview. Very helpful. So yeah, SwiftUI. It's I don't know if we want to lead into this yet, but for collaboration, it's actually very useful. But what about But with the UI components, what's not done of the UI components? Anything, or did you get all?
I think any of the custom ones are done. It's just getting the interactions. Yeah. For me, it's getting the interactions to work correctly. So like the swipe right or swipe left gesture is not working.
Yeah, like it doesn't light up, or it doesn't tell you anything. There's no trigger happening yet.
I think there's no grid, or there's no way to identify like a group of tasks that you've completed yet. So like in the card view, there's a row of your sprint, basically, of like all the days that you've done.
In the mock-up there is.
Yeah, in the mock-up there is, but not in like the key component is there, which is the checkboxes of like so if you've done something, you can check off that day or not. The whole row is not completed yet.
No, but you did make. I saw you made the little components for the how they visualize each individual day.
Yes.
So that stuff.
That was actually fun. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I was looking at it in the previews and I said, "Oh, this is pretty cool." But something about Xcode 14 that it kind of bugs me is there any way to get it to not like separate each preview by a little tab you have to click to see it?
Oh, yeah, there is actually. You can just put them in a VStack. Surprisingly, that works pretty well. And I thought about it, but I was too enamored with like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then I never went back to fixing it.
I like them being named different things, but but it's that is kind of irritating. It's the same item. I just want to see variations of it, or I want to see each state.
I will make that adjustment for you.
Yeah, I don't know. That's more of a 14 thing, because before you used to just put them all like in a line. Right?
Like I was about to say, you can put them in a group, but for some reason, I don't know if that works anymore.
Yeah, I feel like the preview mechanisms aren't quite what I can't quite get them to look the way I want to.
It works, but it works exactly the same way as what is going on right now.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if that's a bug or a feature.
Maybe it's an attempt at a feature that comes off looking like a bug. Look what this thing we did that makes your life a little more difficult. See, we intentionally did that for you. I am sort of beginning, like, it's hard for me to see the full gestalt of the UI. Without having to see the one trick I've noticed that I think it was Mohammad Azam from that article that we're trying to talk about, but he had created components, but in order like a custom tab bar, he would do custom tab bars, right? And normally you said, okay, I just do that custom tab bar in isolation. He just says, no, I'm just going to show the content view, like the main view with that tab bar that's already in there. And then you can preview it there in the proper context.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's pretty smart.
Another technique I see a lot is adding like a navigation stack to like into your preview if you're going to be showing it in a navigation view anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I think that is a good mentality to have when you want to look at these components, you want to look at the SwiftUI views in isolation, but with just enough context around them.
Yeah.
So that you can... Yeah, so sometimes you need to add that, and that's the beauty. The previews are completely separate in a lot of ways from the main view, so you can make those adjustments often.
I didn't even think of that. I was like, wow, I've been doing SwiftUI for so long, and that was like, oh, that's a nice idea. I need to steal that.
So put it in the context.
Yeah. Just put it in a proper context. Like, you don't. If you have a lot of like, I guess the annoying thing is like if you have a lot of environment objects or stuff like that, then that or like bindings or related. But like, actually, you don't even have to worry about bindings because at that point they've probably already been declared in your content view or something, or wherever they're supposed to like reside in.
But if it's too complicated to isolate it like that, then you might be looking at a design issue with your...
Yeah, agreed.
So that's like another great way where, I mean, we talked about, we talked about like the Philly Coca meeting. We're not necessarily going to go into it today too much, but like testing.
Oh, geez. Don't get me started on tests. Man, I wish everybody does this really I have a really horrible relationship with tests. We talk about all these sort of design patterns, right? Of like MVVM, Viper, Coordinator, what's the other one? Composable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure there's tons of more, and
and then TDD is at the very bottom. Is what you're saying?
Well, TDD is a more of a like test-driven development is much more of a style than it is necessarily not style. It's much more of a methodology than it is necessarily a pattern. Right. So like like the traditional fashion about TDD is like you get together, maybe you pair with somebody. Steve, I know you love that.
No pairing.
and you go, hey, all right, why don't you write the test, right? So you write a test to, that is something for which should fail in the beginning, right?
Should fail, yes.
Yeah.
So red, green.
Maybe like let's bear a basic example. Let's say a function, right? Function to calculate, the distance of something, whatever, right? And you have a test, and you get ready to test, and you make sure that it fails, and then you hand off the keyboard that's probably got all tons of germs to your colleague, and you say, "Hey, all right, now you write the implementation to pass this test." So the guy writes the implementation, or the girl writes the implementation to write the test, and boom, everything's good. And then you go, okay, now we're going to spend time refactoring that code. And then afterwards, you never have to touch it again. Come on, Steve. This is where you jump in and like, okay, that's where you're wrong.
Yeah, that's where I touch that.
So,
well, TDD, you're supposed to be designing your APIs in the test. Like you're saying in the test, this is what I want my calling site to be. Like we're talking about unit test level. Like this is what I want my calling site to be. And this is a test around making sure that the functionality, that the unit of functionality I'm building works. And so that's where the TDD comes in, where it's kind of like a design methodology, because you're designing the actual APIs you're interfacing with while you're also building the test. It can work for people in certain scenarios, but it's never. I don't think it works. I don't think it works super well with like mobile UI development, for instance. But it works for. I used to do it a lot when I did Perl.
Yeah,
I used to do it that way.
I mean, for dynamic languages. I think that's you almost have to. And I think the thing that I always feel like unit testing does is just adds a layer of complexity that's not needed. Especially if you're in a big team. But like if you have a QA team, like those tests are almost like false positives in a lot of ways, because it's false like positives. Well, they passed the test. It's like and your QA people come back and be like, no, they didn't. Like they did, but you wrote the test wrong.
Yeah, you wrote the test wrong, and I think it comes down to like when and this is a whole thing. We do a whole episode. We should probably do a whole episode on testing, because often when we're talking about it, we're talking about we're conflating testing concepts. Like there's the unit testing, and then there's but like most
UI
of us are talking
testing,
about
which takes longer.
Integration testing is mostly what I do. Like I'll use unit testing frameworks for convenience to write them, but often I'm writing more like integration tests with semi-live or live data, because I need to know if multiple things work, at once. Especially when you're dealing with external APIs, but same thing with a mobile app. Like we're testing, I think makes sense. We have a complicated bit of stuff that's not your UI, but you that's separated out from it, and you want to make sure that works. Or if you want to do an integration test, to make sure that if I call this, especially the API stuff, like if I call this API, I'm going to get back what I expect, or I'm going to, deal with the errors. That's another thing too. Testing is good for that, to make sure you're error handling, so that you can set up a test to guarantee you get an error.
So those are things that are relatively static in my mind. Like I think that's the difference of where the power of a unit test or testing in general comes into play. When you are fairly sure that you don't have to make too many changes, like maybe the API changes or something that you need to test against those changes with your mobile app. That makes 100% like yes. Those integrations is arguably one of the more important things in mobile development. Problem is when you're talking about a test that relates to UI, which a good chunk of mobile development is, right? And if you have designers, like UI changes a lot in mobile, like dramatically. it could change version to version to version. And because we just do a lot of like tweaking and modifications and moving stuff around a lot, especially with SwiftUI. But
oh yeah, UI testing is worse. Even on the web too. Whenever I've ever tried it, it's super fragile. It's a lot of work, and it doesn't seem like it's worth it. Now, you can do techniques like the snapshot testing, which makes this a little easier. So you're not necessarily interrogating like a view hierarchy or something, but you're just looking at snapshot screenshots and comparing them, doing diffs. And there's some automated ways of dealing with that. But I would say even in that case, that's like great for certain types of things you need to test. Maybe you need to make sure that the layout changes appropriately with different languages or something.
Sure.
Or you need to make sure that some very important UI element shows up in the right place. That's fine. But those types of things have their place. I wouldn't try to test like every single screen, every single. You can go down a rabbit hole of testing every single thing to get 100% code coverage or something like that, and then you're in the realm of wasting time.
And this goes back to like you and I have talked about this. It's like I wish there was a way to measure the amount of time you spend on making these tests, right? And just assess that out as a company, and just say, let me figure out how much time am I getting, and then how much is this more like, how much of this is wasting my developer's time? Who's using a lot of good mental juice every day?
Good mental juice. That's a good
mental
too.
Company juice, right? Every day. Building these stupid tests. Sorry, I'm really
do the rant, man. Do it.
Now I'm in rant.
I rant all the time on this.
Holy cow! I shouldn't be ranting though, but it's like these tests that everyone proclaims are important, and yet holds no quote unquote business value. Which I hate to use that term, but it's one of those things where it's just like I could be making some incredible UI interactions. I can be making the app perform better, refined, getting all the nice things that are, public facing, whatever. And here I am trying to figure out why these tests pass, but shouldn't be passing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the worst scenario. I mean, those tests
that happens all the time, though.
Yeah,
it happens all the time, and people don't talk about it. I remember I would spend maybe about 30 to 40% of my company developer time on tests. And people say, oh, well, that's common. Oh, when you're on a sprint, that's a lot of time.
Yeah, that's a lot of time.
And you wonder, people will complain, like product owners complain, like, why didn't you make your capacity? I don't know. I'm spending half my time fixing these stupid tests.
Well, it's like, doesn't that imply the tests are wrong though? Like they're not designed
but
right.
Look,
yeah, but is it because it's impossible to design them right?
Like it takes a different type of programmer, to build tests. Like nobody's going to be a rock star, and I get that. Like we're not supposed to make complicated unit tests. Like that's supposed to be. That's not what you're supposed to be doing when you're building tests. But that's what ends up happening in the real world. We spend a lot of time trying to figure out, in particular like iOS, it's like where there's no support for mocking, so we have to make mocks. It's like, well, you shouldn't be making mocks. It's like, well, how am I supposed to test the scenario? I have to make mocks. It's like one of those weird, like you spend a lot of time on frivolous things that arguably your QA should probably be able to spot anyway in their test scripts.
Being forced to test things in isolation, though, does lead you down certain kinds of design patterns. So like dependency injection became like this buzzword many years ago in like the C# and Java community and stuff. And I remember that when it was in the .NET world, and there was all these different projects for doing dependency injection at the time. And a lot of that was driven by these like testing frameworks, this big TDD push, and people were like, I need to test my code, but I need to be able to do it. So they had all these dependency injection systems and these mocking systems that came out of that. Now, some of that, though, was beneficial because if you do inject your dependencies one way or another, that does help you to isolate your code to a point, so you don't have these like hard dependencies inside your objects and stuff when you're doing OOP. Sure. So it helped push forward the general developer in that space. Anyway, I think the general .NET developers like design improvements, and then a lot of those ideas they became formalized and integrated into like the standard Microsoft provided .NET frameworks and things. And on the Apple side, then when I started with Objective-C and I don't know. God, was it iOS freaking 5 or something, 6? It was a long time ago.
Sure.
And then like that wasn't really there. There was testing, but there was, even today, there's not really a dependency injection. Well, I guess SwiftUI kind of has dependency injection now.
Yeah.
Like more formalized. But like, there wasn't really like a formal thing. I remember being asked like, well, how do you do dependency injection? And it's like, you make a constructor. I mean, you just it's not. There's not really like a framework. Like in the .NET world, you have this crazy little system that does stuff in the background.
Yeah.
I do see the benefit though for the testing, that kind of testing. But the testing we mostly do are integration testing.
I have to let me step back a bit and say, I have seen the benefits of it, honestly. But sometimes I wonder. Like, this is much more of an emotional thing. Like, this is 100% emotional. So
emotional.
Throw out the proper rational point of view here. Emotionally speaking, all right, it just feels like you're killing the joy out of programming, right? Like, I mean, it's like you're spending like if scaffolding the Sistine Chapel when all you really want to do is sketch. If that's what you want to do, if that's your joy, hey, I'm not going to knock that. But for me, it just feels like a lot of unnecessary work for very minimal benefit. And I stress this point of view about that because it's much more like we tend to, people who tend to like talk. It's like gambling, right? Like, you always celebrate your wins, right? In that sense. So you always remember like, oh, I remember when that worked for me at that one specific time. But every other time, all it is just wasting computer resources. And when you're continuously integrating, I was like, oh, that thing that's supposed to be working is working. Great. And I get it. Like there's going to be times where there's that one time where you hit the jackpot and it fails when it's supposed to fail.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're going to need to do like a whole episode on testing because it's a deep topic and there's different kinds of testing and some are more appropriate in different scenarios than others. Some can be a waste of time. Others can be entirely like necessary. And it's really complicated in the mobile space, especially. And I still feel like there's not great agreement on what to test and when, and there certainly doesn't seem to be the best tooling. Although, I mean, there is better like unit testing, for instance, frameworks built in the Xcode and that you can use for stuff, and there's other third-party testing mechanisms for different types of tests, and it's a deep field in itself. And I don't think either of us are saying don't test anything. I think don't be dogmatic about any particular methodology about it. You have to really think about it, understand what you're testing, why you're testing it. And is it repeatable? And is this going to cause more problems than not? And it's just like with everything else, when you're talking about a real product, it's complicated and there's a variety of factors involved in any kind of decision about how to build it.
The word is it depends, right?
It depends,
If you're building
phrase.
A very critical life-saving or whatever type of app, like for example, I forgot the mechanism for like the watch app to like, if you fall or if you get hurt, like it'll check to see if you're okay or not. Like I would agree, that's an important space to like put some decent.
They probably have some automated testing, but then they also have to do it in the real world to know if the algorithms work.
Very true.
Like
right.
You see with the newest phones with the crash detection, they had to do that in a whole bunch of actual tests, actual crashes to figure out the algorithm and test it. Sure. And even so, there's still some false alarms. Like apparently some people on like some roller coasters was getting set off. Like it happens.
It happens.
So,
and I guess I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm like going through a process of trying to come. Like I'm gonna have a moment where I'm going like, I get it, right? Like what is it? A Danny DeVito meme moment of like, oh, I get it, It hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. But I think we'll do a whole thing on testing at one point. I'd like to explore the testing frameworks in Xcode and stuff.
I mean, as they are in the way they're demoed and the way that I've worked with them in the past, they are fine.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do it much more so early on, so I haven't used the latest versions. I used like way older versions. But we'll get back to that in a future episodes. Sure. Return to what we were talking about like a while ago, right?
What were we talking about?
I think we were talking about an app update for people.
Oh yeah, So where are you, sir?
So I got the basic image picker support working, so you can add like I don't know what we're calling it right now. I think I was calling it like a icon, like a task icon, basically a picture that associated with your task or with your goal. We use I've been meaning this. I'm going to do a little bit of refactoring of some of the names because sometimes we call it a task, sometimes we're calling it a goal, but it's the goal. Mm-hmm. So so like I want to run 5 miles or whatever Monday, Wednesday, Friday or something. That thing you might want to have a little image on it. That's typical. So I integrated the UI, the image picker, which is a UI kit thing, mm-hmm. and into SwiftUI, and it works. And it saves it right now into the core data, into the goals, not into a separate entity, but into the property as binary data.
Oh, that's an interesting point, right? Because I gave you access to my Fave 10 app, and I totally forgot about it, which I shouldn't because there's some bugs in there. And I totally forgot that I did put that in a separate entity, didn't I?
Yeah, so that was different, and I looked at that code because you finally gave me access to it, mm-hmm. and we might adjust things to more like that. Mm-hmm. But the thing you had there, you had lots of different types of things that can go in to the image. I don't know if it's necessary or not. This was, simple and it works. And the advantage of this is, of course, is it is simple and there's less indirection. And theoretically, core data is supposed to offload into a different file the images if they're too big or something. But I have no idea how it makes that decision, so it might not be good.
I thought if you set the checkbox to do that,
I did the checkbox for that. But I don't know how it determines to do that. But so far,
it must be in like the documents folder, maybe. I guess it's
it's in there. I'm saying, but it apparently sometimes it'll be in the database, the same database table, and sometimes it'll split it out into a different one. Mm-hmm. And I think it has to do with like size or something, but who knows what the actual algorithm is. But it works, and I made it like look have a little circle, and resize it. And I implemented a little property on our goals, on a goal core data model, which it's because the actual entity itself has a property called image data, which is the binary data, and so I made an image property, which actually renders out a UI image and then takes in a UI image and just handles going back and forth. So you don't have to think about the backing store in there. So that kind of that works pretty well. And the reason it's a UI image, I think we've talked about it briefly, might have come up last time. The reason is because a SwiftUI image does not apparently give you any way to access wherever it stores the actual backing image data. Like you can make an image because it's a view. It's more like an UI image view than it is a UI image. I understand that, but you still do. You can like give it all kinds of stuff, and it'll display it as an image. So it must have a reference to the data somewhere, but it gives you no access to it. So it's just not the way you're supposed to use it. But UI image does let you like get a PNG output of it, which we need to save, and you can use it as input to create an image SwiftUI. So that's the what we're using. It's also what you did on your app too.
It dawned on me just now.
Yeah.
Just now. It's like everything in SwiftUI is really like in terms of a view, really has to be treated as purely as a consumer of whatever data you give it.
Yes.
And you cannot rely on it to reconvert it back or get access of that data once you've put it into
that's a good point,
said view. So like example, like color. Like if you do color, and you say, okay, I'm pointing to this UI color, you're not getting that back.
Yeah.
you better have a reference to that UI color somewhere else, because
it makes sense because SwiftUI is supposed to be all about having a single source of truth for things. Yeah. So I can kind of see that, but it does make some awkwardness sometimes with certain types of objects. Like, are they going to replace UI image with something more equivalent that's not? Like, I mean, do they need to? I mean, I don't know if they need to.
One thing that like is kind of annoying, and you can litigate it in a lot of ways, is like when you have to do a call to like you want to get a UI image system background, right? There's no actual like pre what's it like a pre extension for like or whatever you call it. There's no color in SwiftUI that is an equivalent to that color of a system background on
Oh,
UI
right,
kit.
yeah.
It's UI color. So you have to refer to UI color dot system background there. Like that's as an example.
Yeah, well, I mean,
But
some of this, it just seems like because SwiftUI is still new compared to UI kit.
yeah.
But yeah, it's, it just is. It's like, it's fine. You work around, you figure it out. But I think that mentality of thinking, okay, if it's a SwiftUI view of any sort, it's just for showing, it's just for taking in data and displaying it. You're not going to get anything out of it again.
Yeah.
And you think about that, then you're like, okay, then that means I need to have, and it just reinforces the idea you need to have a source of truth. That's not like the view. The view is not the source of truth. The source of truth is some model of something somewhere. It's just a slightly different mentality because it's weird. SwiftUI is so weird. It's not really React. It's definitely not like UI kit. You kind of write it in an iterative way, but it also works with like, kind of event based, but it's not right. Not quite. It's very strange when you think about it. It says a lot of concepts are in there that are different than you might be used to.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I don't even think Apple has really figured it out. I mean, they have their own examples and they kind of have an idea, but I don't necessarily think they've committed to like one particular design pattern. Or the design pattern they pick is not something that we're familiar with, right? It just feels like when you look at it and it's like, oh, that's so simple. Like there must be something, there must be missing something, right? Or like, obviously, this is just a tutorial thing. This is not what they would normally build, how they would normally build this app, right?
Yeah, so that is a good point because I think that's going to lead into the last topic. Architectural patterns in SwiftUI, very complex and rich area of debate and discussion, and I've been seeing more stuff about this lately, like more articles, some talks, and specifically you were sharing some stuff from one of our favorite, I guess he's a YouTuber programmer. I guess we can call him that.
He's kind of like a mix of everything. He has his own.
He's a good YouTube channel, though. That's where I saw him from first.
I think he has like a Udemy course.
Yeah, so
like he's got his hands in a lot of things. But I've known him from YouTube. Mohammad Azam.
Mohammad Azam, and he just put out a whole article called SwiftUI Architecture. He's evolved. It's funny because early on in this when we were talking about architectures and we started with like MVVM, and he had videos about that, I believe. That we looked at originally, and then he evolved over time away from that, and he also there was also an NSSpain. Is that what it was? The conference talking about SoundCloud's
experience with SwiftUI,
and part of that was realizing that that they were fighting the system too much, like we talked about before, and they ended up in a similar place to this article, similar place to where we ended up, which is essentially.
Was there? I forgot what their pattern was. Was it coordinator or was that
they used Viper?
Yeah,
SoundCloud They said they used Viper, and then they tried to just implement SwiftUI as the UI layer and leave all the other stuff. But they had when they described this infrastructure, I was like, oh my god, they have so many places where they're converting between different models. Yeah, like they an API comes in that goes to a model, then to a domain model or something, then like a coordinate model, and then like some model that's in like a in memory cache or something. It's there were so many levels that they said they once they published it and everything worked when they rewrote the SwiftUI that Apple sent me emails said that they were 10 times slower than their competition, and then they helped them fix it, helped them like identify the slow parts, and I bet the slow parts were just all of that stuff, and they talk a little bit about it in their talk. But I mean, they were fighting the architecture of SwiftUI, where if you Mohammad Azam, he talks about this like in some of these, and he makes reference to some of the same talks that I remember a few months ago watching from WWDC, and got the same impression that Apple's view of SwiftUI currently seems to be, look, as Mohammad says, he says the SwiftUI view is a view model. That's one way of putting it. And Apple will just be like, here, you have views and you have models and you just link them directly together. So you have one single source of truth that's always reflected in multiple views, potentially. And you just have to update your models, and then the views will reflect that because of techniques like bindings and observable object and stuff. And like that's the way you have to think about it, which is an abstract kind of statement to make. When you get down to coding, it can be difficult to understand sometimes how to make those connections. But that means there's no necessary, most of the time, you don't need an intermediary object. What we do is we do that wherever possible using the property wrappers, which is another thing Apple really pushes, property wrappers. So like for fetch requests for core data, but there's other kinds of property wrappers, and they're for different scenarios. And then, and as he mentions in his article that we'll link in the show notes, that like sometimes there's like they're optimized. Those property wrappers are optimized for different scenarios, so that you don't have the kinds of side effects you might think you would have. And then sometimes you use kind of a view model type object where necessary. Like what we're doing is when I open that edit screen for a goal, it's technically called a view model, but might be better called state or something else. But there's a little object I put in there that just encapsulates what the edit screen needs, and encapsulates creating a child context for specifically because we're using core data, and then does all the work, setting that up, and then when you save it, it just propagates a save up to the parent context, and that way the calling screen, if you're using something like a fetch request, that then that'll be updated automatically because it got updated in the source of truth. And there's just one way of doing this, and it just was easier for us, and we got that from that practical core data book, and it's easier for us because this way edit screens like that can just be dismissed or swiped away or whatever, canceled, and we don't have to do any cleanup because that was kind of the point of it, because it's in a child context, and once you eliminate that, it never pollutes the primary view context that we're currently displaying. So like that's the whole point. That's the one place where we're using like a view model based on the work that's in the practical core data. But otherwise, we're just trying to use the built-in tools. You guys do a lot more SwiftUI. So do you find that this approach that we've been doing that Mohammad suggests is the way to go?
I feel like it's almost like at least for me, it's almost like this weird, like you're trying all these other techniques to see how they feel, right? So, and then you kind of come back to it as like the one that makes the most sense over time. In this case, so like, and sometimes I think like a lot of these design patterns are for the sake of the design pattern versus for the sake of what's right for the problem that we're trying to solve.
It's for the cool acronym like Viper.
Yeah, like like we're not going to any conference with this stuff. We don't care. The funny thing about that is that goes back to my whole rant about testing. Is like half the time these patterns are built to satisfy a need to make sure that you can write good tests against in isolation, versus like, does this like solution, is this a nice simple like pattern to like allow for all the developers of various different skill levels to just get in and play and do the work and get a little sloppy.
I mean, it's like, so architectural patterns are also adopted because you need to coordinate lots of developers on a project. So if you're in that scenario where a lot of like big companies are, if you adopt a particular architecture that gives you like the guardrails to isolate and and also do testing, but that's part of it too, the testing. But it gives you that architecture. If not, then you can end up clobbering each other too much. It does like, there's reasons for doing it, and also if a proper architecture can let you modify the other reason you do it. The main reason is because your hope is that you can modify the software over time without too much difficulty. So you can upgrade piece of it. Now that always works out to more or less, but that's the idea. And so they're not bad. I've used different architectures, even like standard like I
would almost say it would make more sense if the architecture was done in packages. Packages,
like if you implemented your primary like layers or your primary services or whatever you want to call them in the packages.
In a sense, well, here's the thing. Like, if you work in a big enough company, like it doesn't matter what type of thing you try to enforce. Like everybody's gonna, developers are like cats. They're just gonna do what they want to do, and they're gonna be. Some people are gonna do it in a web view because they think web is the future. Some people are gonna do it in React, and next thing you know, all your components don't make any sense. There's the gestalt of the whole app. It looks like it's like built by it's like a Frankenstein app at that point, because like some parts of it feel so the design system might be the same and it might look the same, but it won't feel the same. It just feels like this one loads this way and this one loads in that way. This one loads like statically with its own loader, and this one has its own version of the loader that was a version like 2 years ago or something because they didn't update the loader. It's funny, I think about it a lot recently. It's like apps used to be small enough that it could be done by one person. And it still is. It still can. In fact, I would argue you shouldn't have much more than a small team working on one app at any one time, because you need to have a singular vision. And the more people the more chefs are in that pot, or kitchen, everybody's like dumping their their points of view, and they got to get their bleep in, right? It's just one of those. It makes sense, but the thing that always struck me as interesting is like, I keep going back to this feeling like, and this is a personal opinion, so it's a 2 cents kind of thing where you can take it or leave it. But I was thinking like, we have to think of ourselves like craftsmen, in a sense. Like we're building a piece of, we're building a tool, right? That our users will use for the purpose of whatever whatever the purpose is. But it's if you think about like how Craftsman approaches building tools, right? They spend a lot of time with every part of that process to make it feel like one cohesive product, right? Like you can tell the difference between a handmade knife or done by a dedicated craftsman versus like a manufactured piece of IKEA good knife.
Yeah.
Right?
Although the counter to this metaphor is that
Sure.
like precision engineering is what allows us to have like cars that don't have all mismatched parts and stuff. So it's like in that precision engineering, that kind of standardization and highly precise design, and then computerized reproduction of the parts. Now we're breaking the metaphor a bit here, but like the my point is like the architectural pattern can give you that kind of reproducibility when you have multiple people, because that's the idea anyway. And then you have multiple people working on the project, so that they end up with stuff that fits together better than if you were just doing it all on your own and not considering the architectural patterns involved. So I mean, there's a place for architecture. I mean, there is an architecture whatever you're building. It's just like whether you're thinking about it or not, there's still something. And I think it's better you understand what it is, and specifically if you're working in an environment like SwiftUI or something like you need to understand what is it the creators of this set of frameworks think you should be doing.
Yeah, and at the time, maybe give or take, I think even Apple was probably just
they were winging
it for maybe about 2 to 3 years. I don't mean in a negative sense, but I mean like,
I don't know, man. They had how early were those WWDC talks where they were talking about architecture? I don't know. They were pretty early in the SwiftUI. I think they had an idea from the beginning, but I think it definitely
like protocol oriented or
protocol oriented. But I mean, like they had that, and then they had like the SwiftUI talks, the original SwiftUI talks, some of the early ones where they were talking about, especially I think when they came out with observable object. I think that's when it really gelled, because that allowed them to they had a whole talk about it, and then that's like kind of the glue that holds most of this pattern together, which is you want to have a model that you observe.
Yes,
and
that was extremely helpful.
So that was early on, but that wasn't. Was that version 1 of SwiftUI, or was that it? I know that the name had changed during beta, but I don't know. Was that early? Was that version 1 or 2?
I want to say that was 2.
It might have been, but anyway, it was pretty early on. But and I think since then they've just been kind of really pushing this, and they push the property wrappers as also the interface to bind to your model, and everything's always about you're accessing your model in different ways so that you can basically bind it in some way to the UI.
Yeah, I mean, I'm beginning to see patterns about making custom environments, environment variables where, and environment objects that are relevant to, and using a lot of view modifiers to like almost like glorified CSS styling.
Yeah, the environment though, they mentioned this in that NSSpain talk. I gotta find the link to that for the show notes. They mentioned the environment they thought looked like a singleton, so they didn't want to use it. And we had that same thing where it's like in the beginning we said, you know what, I don't want to use the environment because it feels like a singleton.
Well, well, at least for the environment, at least for like not environment objects, but just like environment stuff that's like kind of only a one-way thing. It passes like stuff downward. Yeah. So it's like if you want to edit stuff, then you need to use some other mechanism. But it's really, the environment is really good if you have like, it's only the data is only going in from the parent to the child.
Yeah.
It's a good way to access it.
Especially if they're like disjointed children. So like if there's a children,
so you don't have to keep passing stuff down.
Which eliminates the need for a complicated dependency injection framework, which is one of the things that we never had on the Apple side, but I'm used to it on like the .NET side or the Java side or something. But you don't need that if you have this other mechanism where you can just kind of access what you need down the hierarchy when you need it without passing it all the way through.
Towards the end, and I know Aaron, you've used this in some work we've done, but you can have an environment object like your state, like your app state, right, of like the full app, right? But then you can break up the components of that observable class and then point to like, okay, this is authentication, this is a authentication state, this can be maybe a UI configuration state, right? And then they can be like classes of their own that you instantiate that are also observable objects, and then pass those in as like app state dot authentication state, app state dot UI configuration state, and then only apply that bit to the parts the views that care about it of individual parts.
Yeah, you don't need to pass the environment in at the root of the entire project. You don't like you can do it lower in the hierarchy of stuff.
And you can also even break up that environment object into smaller components, basically, so that only the components get called when they're needed. And that actually will only update that particular bit, which is kind of cool.
Then there's the other thing that I didn't really mess with for a while, which is PreferenceKeys, which is like another component for like passing data the other way from a child to the parent. So
I vaguely remember the term. I feel silly not remembering it. But it's good. I remember it being like, oh, this is cool. Yeah. So look.
I have to look at what preference keys are. I didn't see it in docs.
It's there.
I'm sure it's there. Oh, one thing's the NSSpain. I think it was the NSSpain people said, just like read the documentation. They said that, like read the. I was like, that's a good point. I should review some of because I do read it, but I haven't like systematically read it. And maybe I should just start at the top and just keep moving.
Sometimes I'll read just basic stuff, whether it be like generics or protocols, or just to like refresh my mind of like, I need to make sure that I understand how and when to use these, these more, increasingly more important kind of components of the Swift feature, and then how to apply that to SwiftUI. So that's something that I want to get better at going forward, and particularly with our side project, I want to like figure out ways to take those opportunities and like flesh them out, and also maybe even apply that to my Fave 10 app. That's, believe it or not, was done in SwiftUI 2.
I believe it. I'm trying to get it to run. I was trying to get it to run yesterday properly.
You might need to go back a few commits.
Well, I mean, it works, but then it's like you click on something and then there's nothing on the screen anymore. Like something's wrong with
it gets swished to the left or something.
I don't even see it. It just disappears. Right. It goes so fast in Simulator. But it's something to do with the animation. I mean, with the movement with Geometry Reader, I think.
Yeah, I think back in the day, you can get very, very obnoxious with Geometry Reader.
Oh my god, dude! It's hard to tell by reading the code what's happening because of that. Because everything it's like old school UI kit in that sense, where you're manipulating everything by hand and you're like moving. Because I remember doing that to try to get that kind of effect, or I have to move the view off the screen now, and then I have to calculate how to get it back on the screen, and like all that crap is mostly taken care of for you if you're doing normalish type of iOS stuff nowadays.
I mean,
SwiftUI.
One of the things I do want to get better at, and I don't know, Aaron, if you've spent much time on it, but I really want to get good at understanding how the animation system works in SwiftUI, because I think that's going to be really important going forward of really getting good at those type of transitions of custom transitions.
Yeah, there's the whole thing with the transaction system, and it's a weird thing related to threading of like if you use with animation, then it's like it sets the animation on the transaction. So if you have other things that are happening in the same thread, then they all get animated, or all their animations get overridden, and so you get weird things.
I saw one where you can like nil out an animation, then apply a new one.
Yeah,
but
so
you're doing it in like you're doing it on the modifier level, so it's like this weird like what's. But
you can make your own. You can make your own transactions. So I think that's probably the best way. I think the whole thing is with the with animations, like implicit animations, I think it's called. So it's like it just kind of you got to make sure you know what's happening on that transaction. It's like if you tap a button and it has its own animation or built-in animation, then it'll override it.
I mean, they do have a dot transaction where you can actually print that statement out, and to figure out like what's going on when you're doing something.
Well, it's also where you can like edit stuff on that.
Yes. So. I've been playing around with that a little bit, but I haven't really like deep explored that. I want to get good.
What the lesson here is that we should all just make a cup of coffee and just sit back and read all of the SwiftUI documentations. Like just sit there and read it like a book.
Oh, jeez.
That's probably not the best way.
Well, you know what's funny? Yeah. At least for me, I know my parents used to always try to get me to read like novels, and I would try to read the novels, and I just couldn't read past like my eyes would glaze after the first page. It's like maybe like few books that could grab my attention, like maybe Jurassic Park would be one. And like,
I remember that. But here, the thing is, man, the SwiftUI documentation page on Apple actually is laid out like a book. Like they have it well organized. Like the app structure that has like organization and scenes, documents. Also, they have data and storage. That including environment and model data. They have views, view layout, accessibility, all this stuff in there. It's all organized really well, like conceptually. And it's laid out with chapters in a book, and then it's not too bad. I mean, and they have a lot of kind of narrative text and explain and little snippets of code to explain things. So it really is written in a much more like literary way in that sense. Like it's written with more prose than you might expect. It's not just APIs, just automated API documentation. Someone took a lot of effort to write explanatory text about all this stuff. So it is it's interesting because I don't remember Apple's documentation ever being this like well organized. It was fine, but it was like
I think people complain because they're not finding the specific thing they're looking for a lot of times. Versus the general documentation, which I find to be good.
Yeah, I DuckDuckGo it to find it. The search doesn't work always that great on, but
I think it's fine.
But I'm telling you, I like this documentation. So if you can actually sit back and read this, and you're like, I'm interested in like how do you do model stuff? Like I did that early on in this project. Environments. What is this? What are preferences? What is that? There's a whole section on this. Like what on preferences? Like what is that? And they have a nice layout, and some are have more pros than others, sections, but it's good. Read the docs. That's what we're saying. Like Aaron did. That's why Aaron knows what the heck is going on. And we're like, what's a preference key? He's like, it's in the docs, morons. Come on,
read the effing manual.
Read the effing manual. Yeah. Remember RTFM? Oh, that we used to say that back in the 90s. We used to say that. There was like a what was it? There was a online.
I mean, that was kind of like was that more of a Linux thing than it was?
Yeah, there was a Unix thing, like read the effing manual. Yeah. But no, there was like there was this like sysadmin character, like comedy story series or something. I'm trying to remember what it was. Where it was, I think that's where I got this from, the RTFM thing. Where it was like these stories, and they might have been real or they might have been based on real stories. I don't know, but they were like these funny stories about like a system administrator's headaches, And often it's like read the effing manuals with the results. But yeah, RTFM came up a lot in the early. I remember the '90s reading like online stuff about mostly about Unix things.
I mean, it's just one of those things. Like Stack Overflow these days would be like the modern, like all the sort of like.
Although
like we've already answered that question, right?
Yeah,
Here's
although Stack Overflow is always outdated though, so it's like, especially something like SwiftUI, you go there and you're like, well, this is like SwiftUI 2. This is not the best, explanation anymore. Things have changed. Or
I mean, it is sort of fascinating. Like I've begun to drift to look for other places to find my answers with SwiftUI.
Well, me too. Yeah, I start with the docs now. I actually go to the Apple docs often first because they're well.
I mean, there's a growing list of blogs that I begin to find more and more that I like. Mohammad was one.
Azam.
The other Mohammad is the other.
The other Mohammad, today Mohammad.
Then there is the Cavsoft. There's
Cavsoft.
There's Swift
by
Sendel. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
There's Stack Overflow podcast. There is
Design by
Hacking
Code,
with Swift.
Designing Code or whatever. That's
Ray Winderlich is good, but it's always very it's a much more Android focused these days. So
really,
there's less and less Swift content as much. So I've begun to sort of drift out a little bit more.
Yeah.
They still do it, and they still do a very good job. Still a strong recommend.
Interesting that it's now more Android.
Yeah, I mean, Android still, regardless of how we feel, I mean, Android is very much the dominant platform in terms of if you're China, India, Italy, or like any country that is not UK, United States, and Japan, maybe.
I talked to the Android dev at work because he's been going into Kotlin and really exploring that space, and we were having a little discussion about Kotlin and Jetpack and versus like SwiftUI and stuff. And basically, Apple does things weirdly. It's like different from everybody else. I was like trying to explain like protocol oriented programming. So it's like not really a thing. I was trying to it's kind of like an interface. It's not really quite the same thing as an interface. I gave up. I was like, I can't really explain protocol. You just have to watch the WWC video to understand what this is. Stuff like that comes up. Like they just use terminology that's unique to Apple world.
Yeah,
and, it makes talking sometimes.
Last I remember Kotlin, like seeing Kotlin, like just even to do a demo about like the similarities and differences about it. I just remember saying like that's much more similar than it is different in a lot of ways.
It's in so much so that it's probably difficult to jump back and forth between languages because some things are just different enough in just syntax by like a letter, but then there are conceptual differences too. Like there are bigger differences, but they have a lot of similarities, and it's I can't imagine jumping back and forth on the same day between them. It might have a lot of context shifting pain. Because I have that even now sometimes between Swift and like C#, and they're not like the most similar, but they have some similarities because they're in syntax. And so I'll start writing something and like, why doesn't this work? It's like, oh crap, that's because that's like the other language's way of doing something.
Does C# still have semicolons?
Yes, that's a big thing. That's a big difference.
Okay.
Yeah, semicolons.
I just because that would always be the one that tricked me up. I was like, oh, I forgot.
Yeah, that's something all time now. Yeah, because Objective C, versus like Swift, that was like a one
Objective C. I have to remember to like be like the Michelin Man line.
I gotta tell you, I gotta say, at least the Xcode's autocomplete stuff is getting better, but it still always feels better in Objective C. Like I still feel like there's still times where Xcode is just slow and weird about like the autocomplete and
Objective C is actually really nice in a like people get annoyed by its verbosity, but when you get into a rhythm, you're just like pop 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 pop. Next thing you know, you're just like you're barely typing much of the code. It'll just autofill that in for you.
You better just hope your tab bar doesn't break because then you're screwed.
Then you're screwed. Then you're really screwed. Then you got to remember the actual syntax.
Yeah, but the SwiftUI architecture. We'll link to this article. I think it's worth reading.
Yep, definitely worth a read.
It has some good examples in there. It's fun, and the
post in the Slack group if we haven't already.
Yeah, and his YouTube channel is great too.
Yep.
There's some really good videos out. He just did some. He's just doing some about this concept now. It looks like, and so there was a good little. I watched a short one. where he was building like a budget app. I think that was his channel.
Oh, nice. All right,
And
I'll have to
he was
check
building
that out.
something with, but and there's some good YouTube channels. Try to find some links that have.
I will
good topics.
If crazy UI and experimental UI is your thing, Cavsoft is the place to look for that kind of stuff. And he has a great YouTube channel. He has a Patreon. Like if you do $3 to $5, you get the source code right there. It's worth it.
Oh, Cavsoft. Yeah, that's the other one.
.net. Or is it .net? I think so. In any case,
one of those between Azam and Cavsoft. There's like the videos I see most that I'm like watching.
Yeah. iOS Academy, I think, is also really good.
Yeah.
There is there's another one I'm trying to remember offhand, but we'll put it in the notes if we find it. But I think we are definitely over our time, which unfortunately Steve will have to cut down.
Okay.
So let's call it for today. You can learn more about Philly Cocoa at phillycocoa.org. There you'll find links to our Slack, meetup schedule, and contact info. If you're feeling generous, please leave a review on the Apple Podcast app and share us with all your developer friends. And one more thing. There's only two kinds of programming languages out there. The one people complain about and the one no one uses. Until next time, good luck on your own developer journey. We will cheer for you always. Good mental juice every day